Tony, let's go ahead and take it away.
Okay, well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for the opportunity to be here and thanking you for taking some time to join. Looks like I'll be talking mostly to non-GISPs, which is awesome, but I'll also be glad to answer any questions for those of you that have your GISP certification as we go through this presentation. So I'm going to try to keep an eye on the chat window, but if anybody has a question, if either Michelle or Rob, if you can just kind of pop up and ask that question so I can hear it, I'll try to answer it as I'm going. And of course, I'll also answer questions at the end of the presentation. So again, thanks. It's great to be here. I'm actually joining you from the National States Geographic Information Council meeting in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. So it's nice that meetings are starting to get back to person. I really enjoy doing the virtual presentations, but I also enjoy getting out, meeting new people and talking to folks. So hopefully I'll get a chance to come to your conference some November and meet all of you in person. And hopefully by then everything will be back to normal. So this afternoon, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about GISCI, the GIS Certification Institute, and then the GISP certification process. And I want to talk a little bit about the history of the organization, the history of the process itself as it exists today, and kind of where we're heading in the not too distant future. But before I start, there we go. I have to ask, which magic is this? And I asked that kind of jokingly because whereas you guys are the Memphis Area Geographic Information Council, which is magic, I've been involved with a different magic, the Mid-America GIS Consortium. And so we are a 9-state consortium. I think our mission is probably very similar to yours. This is the first time I've been able to speak to you guys. So I'm actually speaking to your magic first this year, and then I'll speak to my magic in April. But believe it or not, for a very brief period of time, Tennessee was a part of magic. It was back in the days of, I believe it was Joe Seawash, Sam Moffitt, and Dennis Peterson, if those names mean anything to anyone on the call. And it didn't last very long, but if we are a non-exclusive group, so if you ever want to come over and see the other magic, I invite you to do so at magicgis.org. So I am glad to be with you guys in this magic. And I want to start talking a little bit about the GIS Certification Institute. So the GISCI has actually been around for a number of years. It was officially started in 2003, and it was an idea that existed a long time before then. And so the formalization of the idea of bringing a professional certification to the geospatial world started back in the late 90s. The Institute began in 2003 and began with the certification program, which has evolved into the current program that we have now, the GISP program, which is based in part on the GIS core competency knowledge exam that we added in 2015. So the GISCI is we're actually a not-for-profit organization. Our sole mission is to provide the GIS and geospatial community with a complete certification program, which leads to the GIS professional or GISP recognition. We are based in the United States of America, but we are a worldwide institute. We do have GISPs in 57 countries, every state, I believe every state in the US. And we continue to grow both domestically as well as internationally. Like I said, it really began as an idea in the 1990s, primarily with ERISA. There were a lot of other folks that were instrumental in getting the organization where it is today. But it really started with the idea that folks felt that what was going on in the world of GIS was leading to a profession, and they wanted to bring one of the steps in making an idea or an industry a profession, and that was professional certification. The GISCI is currently comprised of 4 member organizations that essentially serve as the function of a board. This is one of the strengths of our organization in that we have a very broad representation from within the geospatial community. This is not an exclusive list of organizations. One of my jobs is to start working with other organizations in the geospatial community and bring them on board. But currently the 4 member organizations are ERISA, NSGIC, AAG, and UCGIS. And they've been with us for a number of years. I believe AAG, ERISA, and NISTRIC are original members. We've had a couple added, and we've seen a couple depart. Unfortunately, GITA was one of our member organizations. They ceased operations a few months ago. So the landscape is changing, but we try to maintain the strength and making sure that we have a very broad and diversified board that runs our organization. Our board is made up of a board of directors. Each organization has 2 members that serve on the board. I, as the executive director, work at the discretion of the board and essentially work together with the board on strategic plan and implementation of that plan. And then we have a small staff of folks that help support the operation. So for those of you that are GISPs, you've probably either heard of or remember Bill Hodge, who was the previous executive director. He continues to help us as a consultant. And then you probably have heard from Katie Morehouse, who is our financial person and helps us maintain our billing and recertification cycles. So let's talk a little bit about the history of certification. Like I said earlier, the GIS-CI began offering the professional certification in 2003. And then in 2015, we launched the exam. So we have 2 different cohorts of GISPs. One is pre-exam and then one is post-exam. Question of why do we have this certification and why does it exist really kind of goes back to the idea of professionalism. The idea of professional certification is not something new that we invented for the geospatial industry. In fact, it's been around for a number of years and it's prevalent in most industries. And really what certification is a process by which somebody is able to show that they have the skills or knowledge, the experience, and the capability of performing within a certain profession, and usually to a certain level of competencies. Where certification comes into play is really predicated on the industry itself. And so if you look at that little graphic, you see something starts as an idea, it evolves into a technology, which becomes an industry, which leads to profession. And then that profession leads into the certification, and we see a continued growth industry. And indeed, if you're around in the old days, and I came in towards the end of the old days, geospatial really began as GIS. It was a program. There are actually a number of programs out there. Most of us are familiar with ArcInfo or now ArcGIS, but we had ERDOS, we had GRASS, we had a lot of different softwares to use. And so the idea of spatial analysis evolved into the technology of the software and of course the equipment that came with it. And we began growing it and began to gain traction, and it became the geospatial industry. And this is about where the GIS Certification Institute began as an idea, because folks felt like they were an industry, but they didn't feel like there was a profession. There indeed was no GIS or geospatial profession, but it was heading in that direction. And so as we began to evolve away from just an industry or a GIS, a bunch of people doing software, we grew into the geospatial profession. The certification was a logical next step. And so that's where we are today. Criteria for professionalism and the basis for our GISP: self-awareness, a unique body of knowledge, a social idea to unify the professionals, a formal organization of its members, a hall of fame, and a code of ethics. And if you look at that in the context of the geospatial industry, we see all of these things now. We do recognize, and there's recognition of the geospatial industry and the geospatial profession. There is a very unique body of knowledge that exists within our discipline. We have unity among professionals. We have a number of professional organizations and formal organizations. Your Magic, My Magic is one, NISGIC, and the like. So there's a lot of organizations. I don't know of a Geospatial Hall of Fame yet, but we certainly have the grandfather of GIS. And so I think we're heading in that direction at some point. And then we have a code of ethics. And as probably one of the biggest and most important parts of the GISP is the code of ethics. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. So why certify? Certification demonstrates a commitment to behaviors that enrich the profession. So basically, it's an investment. It's a personal investment of time and effort into helping grow and build out the profession. It's the difference between going to work and punching in and then going home at night. Certification, in order to be certified and be in a certification program, you have to grow your professional knowledge and skills. So it's investment in yourself. It is a differentiation from other professionals because you are contributing to the profession. You are helping grow yourself. It's that code of ethics. Certification helps establish professional credibility. And indeed, we see that when we look at other professionals, we see those initials behind their names, such as PhD, DDS, GISP, and the like. It signifies that professional certification that they've acquired. And quite frankly, another reason to certify is it helps increase your earning potential. And that's very important for many folks, myself included. And so what we do know is that GISPs do earn more on average. Not all do, obviously, but a lot do. It depends on where you are and who you work for. Most, if not all, unions would automatically give you an increase in pay. Well, they don't. The employer does. Many industries, though, and many government agencies and the like, at a minimum, will provide funding for the certification, for the renewal of fees, and for all the education that goes with it. And so one of the things we are working on is helping raise that awareness and help build up that earning potential for our members. So what's the difference between certification and licensure? And they are very different things. I actually maintain 3 certifications and 2 professional licenses. Within the industries, there's about 1,600 different types of certifications. So again, the GISP is not unique in the sense that it's a standalone. It's one of many certifications, but it's one of very few in the geospatial profession. About 17% of the workforce in 2019 held some types of certification or license. So about 20, not quite, but almost 20% of our workforce. Within the geospatial community, we're aware of 4 different certifications. One is the ASPRS remote sensing certification. And there are 2, I believe it's mapping technologists and photogrammetrists. So they actually have 2 certifications. The US Geospatial Intelligence Foundation has the GeoInt, or Geospatial Intelligence certification, and that one is currently suspended, or it has been. Esri actually has a number of technical certifications, but the difference there is that these are certifications specifically for software products. It's not an actual professional certification, but it's a certification for a type of software or a type of procedures associated with that software. And then finally, there's the GISP within the GISCI. And so that is the predominant and the largest base of all those 4 certifications for professionals in the geospatial world. There are some other certifications, especially related to mapping throughout Europe and the world, but these are the ones that are currently active in the United States. The biggest difference between certification and licensure is that with certification, it's an official document. So it's granted by a governing body that proves you have attained a certain level of knowledge and achievement, and that it qualifies you for that specific line of work unique to the certification. Licensure is actual proof that you're licensed to work within your profession. Licensure is actually a legal designation, and it has a very clear set of requirements. And typically there's a very clear set of actions that happen if you violate the licensure itself. And so that is probably the biggest difference, is that legal aspect of it. And really what we see with licensure is typically licensure is done state by state. And so if you know of, or if you've ever worked with surveyors, you know that surveyors are licensed. When they're licensed, they're almost always licensed by their individual state. But they could have licensure in multiple states, but you typically have government bodies that provide those licensure. And so in my case, I'm a licensed emergency medical technician, and I'm a licensed pyrotechnician. And both of those licenses actually come from the state of Missouri, and they give me legal allowances of what I can and can't do within those fields. So licensure tends to be more specific in what you can and cannot do. And of course, it's got that legal component to it. So within the GISCI, we have the GISP, which is a certification. And the history of our certification is that we are currently growing. We began in 2003, and we're a little bit north of 10,500 folks that have obtained their GISP at some point. We're old enough as an organization that we're starting to see some of our GISPs retire. And so their certifications are falling off. Some folks leave the industry. And so right now we have about just north of 6,500 active GISPs. And that number fluctuates because every year a number of GISPs come off our rolls if are eligible for renewal. Some do, some don't. Most people tend to renew late. So, that number actually is a little bit higher than 6,500 because we have a lot of folks that are pending in their certification renewals. But we are seeing a very slow and steady growth. The pandemic has slowed our numbers somewhat. So we're hoping to recover on those in terms of the additions. And then, of course, the pandemic has affected our recertifications as folks have struggled to get the points for recertification. And we are working with them to ensure that they can recertify without penalty. So who certifies? What we found with our demographics, and this data is a couple years old, about 50% of our GISPs work in the private sector. And indeed, there are a large number of companies that either require or highly encourage their geospatial staff to become GISPs. And there are a number of organizations that are almost 100% staffed at the GISP level. About 35% of our GISPs work at all levels of government. A lot of those folks are local government. A good chunk are state. We do have some federal participation, but not quite as much as the state and local. And then the remaining 15% are in academia or in other sectors such as tribal, the not-for-profit world, utilities. We're actually seeing a lot of folks in the utilities community start coming on board and the like. We don't typically have a lot of students, as one of the requirements is that you have 4 years of experience in the industry, but we do have some folks that do have that experience and are actively in school that have got their certification. So I do see two questions. One was, why was the GEO certification suspended? My understanding, well, probably the best way I could answer that is to talk with the folks at USGIF. My understanding, it was a combination of lack of participation and the program was I think they were trying to reassess the program. Again, I would encourage you to talk to them directly to get the best answer. But I can tell you right now that test-based certification like ours is very expensive. And so you have to make sure that you have the right base before you can move forward. And I think they were struggling with the financial aspect of it and wanted to reassess and make sure that the certification was appropriate for the folks in the field. Second question I see is, how can one be grandfathered in? We do not have a grandfather clause at this time. If you are a GISP, an active GISP that came in before the testing and you maintain your certification, you do not need to take the test. However, if you're starting from step one, it doesn't matter if you have 0 experience in the industry or 30 years, everybody starts that same process. And if those answers aren't clear, just let me know and we can cover more at the end. So let's talk about the GIS process and how one becomes a GISP. Essentially, for all of our initial GISPs, they begin by doing one of 2 steps. One is to submit an online portfolio, and that portfolio looks at your requirements. Actually, it's based on requirements for education, experience, and contributions to the profession. You must have 4 years of experience in the geospatial industry. The second part is to pass the GISCI core technical knowledge exam. Those 2 processes do not need to happen at the same time. One can happen before the other, or they can. And then all initial GISPs have to sign an ethics statement. If you complete all 3 of those steps, you become certified for a 3-year certification period. Once you become a GISP, you have the same set of portfolio requirements, although they're greatly reduced because now we're looking at a 3-year span, not your entire career up to that point. You have to re-sign an ethics statement, and assuming you get an approved portfolio that meets those point requirements in education and contributions to the profession. In this point, and recertification experience is optional. you also begin a 3-year recertification period. So all of our certifications run 3 years. Cost for becoming a GISP, initial GISPs will pay a $100 application fee. That's a one-time fee. The portfolio review fee, also a one-time fee, is $100. Each time you take the exam, it's $250 or $300 international. And then the annual maintenance fee for all GISPs is $95 a year. Initial GISPs do get 1 free year, so you only have to pay for your 2nd and 3rd years. But beginning in your recertification, you will have to pay $95 a year, or you can make a single payment of $285, which most people do. Our annual fees have been stable for a number of years. They will likely stay stable for a number of years, and they are probably on the low side of professional certification fees, if not right in the middle. So we try to keep the cost as low and as reasonable as possible. Preparing for the exam. So the exam is a requirement for all new GISPs. The exam provides a measurable competency level, and indeed, prior to the exam, a lot of folks had a criticism of the GISP certification that really anybody can do it, get it. And that's not entirely true, because you have the same portfolio requirements as in a pre-test as you do a post. But at the same time, that exam does provide for a higher level of competency and credibility for the actual process itself. And indeed, most of, like all 3 of my certifications required me to take an exam. And so this is essentially an industry standard. And that's why we went that route, because the exam process it does follow accreditation standards. And so essentially we're trying to do what the industry does when it comes to testing and certification. The exam is written by GISPs for GISP certification. It assumes that you have 4 years of experience. So you will see questions based on experience and folks that have been in the industry. It is centered on applied knowledge. So we actually have a blueprint. That applied knowledge is based on the UCGIS body of knowledge. We have a blueprint, and I'll talk about that here in a couple slides, that helps guide the exam. We currently offer the exam twice a year in June and December. It's offered on the 1st Saturday, and it runs through the 2nd Saturday of the month. So there's 8 days for testing. Our June exam is open for 2022, so you can sign up right now. We do all of our testing at testing centers throughout the country. COVID has shut some of them down, but I think at this point, almost all of them will be open for the June exam. And you can schedule for any of those 8 days at whatever time is available in those testing centers. You do have 6 years to complete all 3 parts of the certification. We have very few people. We're just now entering that period of 6 years since the test, and we only have a very small number of folks that haven't completed all the pieces. So most people do get it done that 6-year window. The exam knowledge areas that we use in the test, again, can come from the GISP community. The test is designed to reflect the industry as it currently exists. And so you're going to see the type of questions that you would expect to encounter on a typical workday. Like I said, it's based on that GIS and T body of knowledge. So this is a highly recognized document within the industry. And basically what we're trying to do is create a very broad-based but applicable test that is reasonably easy for an educated and experienced GIS professional to pass. We are not intentionally trying to fail people or keep our pass rate low. Quite the opposite, we want folks to pass. But at the same time, we need to have a fair exam that meets those industry standards. So the current exam blueprint is based on 10 areas, starting with conceptual foundations and running through professional practice. You can see that the first 3 represent 35% of the exam. So 15% of the exam questions are coming from geospatial data fundamentals. 10% are coming from conceptual foundations. So really, a third of the exam is centered around the basis of our industry. So the basics that hopefully everybody knows and they learned in school. And then we go through the list of data acquisition, manipulation, and the like. And so we have 10 knowledge categories. And then we break those down into 45 KSAs. And I'm not showing you all of the KSAs, I'm just showing some of you, but all of this is available to you on our website. So again, we don't give you the questions, but we tell you where the questions are coming from. And so this is the guide that we encourage folks to use when they first start studying for the exam. Because again, it tells you what type of questions that you can expect to see on the exam. So like I said, the exam is taken at one of our official testing centers, and currently our contractor is a company called PSI. It is composed of 100 scored multiple choice questions or multiple response. There is an additional number of non-scored questions, that's currently 80, and those are evaluation questions. If you ever remember taking the ACT, SAT, or GRE, you did this exact pattern where you took scored questions and unscored questions. And the reason we have the unscored questions is we're basically testing them to make sure they're good questions for future exams. We don't want to ask a question that nobody is going to get, because that's not fair. When you take the exam, you do not walk out with a result, which I know is not fun. And trust me, if I were to tell you the #1 complaint and that's it, and I get it 100%. But what we do is after you complete the exam, now keeping in mind it's an 8-day process. So after the 8th day of exams, we will actually take that data and we will analyze it and basically run it through 3 processes. This is called psychometric analysis. And these processes are designed to ensure that there were no errors in the testing. It doesn't happen very often, but it can happen where a testing center makes a mistake. And so the test you took was not properly scored. These processes will actually catch that. And then we can go back and reevaluate and give you the proper score. The exam previous to the December one, so June of 2021, we had 3 people that would have failed that exam had we not run that process. And so as you can imagine, it's much better for us to take a little bit more time to make sure we get the analysis right and make sure you get the right score than to just kind of rush you through and tell you how you did. So I do apologize it takes that long. We are working on shortening that process, but we do follow industry standards for scoring the exam. A lot of folks will ask, how do they prepare for the exam? And the simple answer is there's no way to do it. This is a very broad exam. We give you the blueprint. We give you some suggestions. And then we encourage you to study in the best way that is good for your type of learning style. Some of the things that you can do, there are some unofficial exam preparation documents available on our website. We do have some learning resources as well. There are a number of third-party groups that do either exam workshops. For instance, ERISA has one coming up, I believe, on the 18th of February. It's within the next week or two. And ERISA typically does 3 to 4 exam prep workshops a year. There's a teaching company called Teach Me GIS that offers a preparation course. And there are a lot of groups that organizations that have study groups. So I know there's one in, we recently talked to one in Arizona. I know there's one starting in California. And so if that's something that you're interested in, we'd be glad to help you with that. And then the other thing that we do offer is we do offer an official practice exam. This is fairly new. It's probably been about 2 or 3 years now. And what the practice exam is, it's old questions that we've retired for the exam. And we run you through the process like you were taking the exam, but it's only 50 questions. There are no non-scored. So usually it takes you an hour or less to complete the exam. It is set up the very same way, except you take it at home. You don't have to actually go into a testing center to do it. $30 gets you 2 attempts. And what we encourage folks to do is to take the exam, look at the results, see where you need to improve, spend some time studying, working on that, and then you take the exam a second time as part of the $30 fee. Then you can compare and contrast and see how you did in terms of, focusing in on key areas of studying. And so I've got a link there, and this is being recorded, but you can find it fairly easily on our website. So we are seeing, we don't have enough data to say this definitively, but what we are seeing is that folks that do take the exam, especially when they do it twice, for that one $30 fee, we're seeing that the practice scores tend to be very similar to the actual scores. So it is a good indicator if you take the practice exam and come out of it with an 80 or a high score, you're probably going to do fairly well. And if you don't get a good score, it's an indication that you might want to take a little more time to study and delay taking the exam. It's not always the case, but that seems to be pretty consistent. So what's next for the GISCI? We're going to continue to work to promote the field of GIS and its professionals. We update the exam about every 3 to 4 years. We anticipate doing an exam update next year. And again, the reason why we do that is because our industry is changing. So we want to make sure questions are pertinent. You don't want to see a question on AML or Avenue, which are old programming languages, because they're not relevant anymore. So we want to get rid of the old questions, make sure we have new ones. Our current exam doesn't really cover anything related to drones because it's popped up in the last couple of years. We're working hard to increase communication. One of the things we're trying to do is more workshops like this and being more available within the community. But what we really want to do is we want to grow the profession. We want to grow the Certification Institute, and we want to grow our membership. And so we're really starting to look beyond just the United States. We want to look international. We did announce a new designation for retirees, the GISPR. We're in the process right now of putting together an opportunity for college level students, graduates primarily, and developing a pathway for those folks to help them kind of aid them into the process. We're also helping states in being involved with legislative issues that are related to the geospatial industry and special certification, but other aspects of it. Again, greater outreach with students and that GISPR that we've talked about. So I want to close, and I know I'm starting to get a little thin on time. So I've been in the position now for about 7 months, and I've heard from a lot of different people, a lot of folks. And I think a lot of folks question, well, what is the point or what is the validity in the GISP? And I actually had somebody ask me once, well, why should I hire a GISP when I can hire anybody? So my answer to that is actually pretty simple. If you want to become a GISP and maintain that certification, it is a long-term investment. You have to prepare and take the exam and pass it. And then you have to continue to educate yourself. You have to continue to give back to the industry. That's the key, right? We're not just content to go to work. GISPs are willing to do extra work. They're willing to do what it takes, and they're willing to do things to help their profession move forward. GISPs also abide by code of ethics, and that's very important. Many GISPs are leaders in their profession, in their field. Some are very quiet leaders, some are very vocal leaders. And if you look at our ranks, and you can do that, you can see it online, you're going to see a lot of folks that are titans of the industry that have been around for years and help develop this. So I want to really close out with a quote that actually is from a gentleman that I had a chance to talk to this afternoon. That's Bill Johnson. I don't know if any of you know Bill Johnson. And we had done a survey with NewsJIT about a year ago and asked what folks thought. And Bill came back and said, initially when the GISP first came out, I didn't see any value. This is when he was the CIO of New York. And I didn't pay any attention to it. He said, but then as I got to learn about it, participate a little more, his response was he views the GISP as something that reinforces behaviors that enrich our profession. And indeed, Bill is a GISP, and he's a big supporter. And so with that, I'd definitely like to turn it over to questions if we still have time. And I do see a couple in the chat. Let's see. Yes, somebody mentioned the practice exam. I do highly recommend that. I see that you've had some issues getting logged onto the exam. If you want to reach out to me, you can see my email address and just send me an email. We'll try to get you through that and see what the problem is. And I see somebody mentioned that Cam is interested in doing a GISP study group. Again, I would encourage you to reach out to me. I'm actually speaking to Cam in a few weeks for one of their lunch and learns, and we'd be glad to help you. Any other questions?
Yeah, actually,
we definitely. Oh, go on.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say we definitely have time for questions, so go for it.
Yeah, Tony, I'm Joe Armstrong. I'm the GIS coordinator for the Memphis Fire Department. Now, if someone who has a brand new GISP applies for the same job I applied for and I have 30 years of experience, would they be looked at as a more likely candidate than I would?
Well, that's not an easy question to answer, obviously, but it really depends. I think the GISP is not something that would differentiate you without other aspects of your professional career, including experience. But what I would argue is that if you have two very similar candidates, I can tell you when I used to hire folks, and I used to work for the Department of Conservation, and I had about 24 folks working under me. If I had two equivalent candidates and one had GISP, I would look more favorably on the GISP simply because I know that's the type of person that's going to work a little bit harder to improve their self and improve their industry. That's not to say that both aren't qualified, but it is a differentiation. And indeed, what we see in terms of pay scale is recognition of the GISP as an additional achievement, which does lead to the additional salary because employers want to reward their employees, for going above and beyond. Especially when you consider that as a GISP, you have an education requirement. You have to invest in yourself. And so that helps move you forward. And that's what a lot of employers want to see.
But well, now, Tony, with that being said, the candidate who has, let's say, 20+ years of experience and this other person is a GISP, would you be more inclined to hire the person who has more experience and encourage him or her to go for the GISP?
Yes, I would definitely do that. And I encourage my staff, a number of my staff, actually, two of my staff were GISPs when I hired them. And I and my organization fully supported them. We paid for the recertification fees. We covered all their education requirements. So absolutely, yes.
Thanks.
Tony, we have another question in the chat. Is a traditional four-year degree a requirement for achieving certification?
It is not. And so in the educational component, the way you acquire education is either through accredited institutes, but like a university, non-accredited institutes, Esri, and then like conferences and workshops and webinars like this one. So this webinar would actually count towards education points. You don't have to have any degree to get a GISP. Having a degree helps you get points because a master's would be worth, I think, 20 points. Or 25 points towards a 30-point requirement. But you don't have to have a degree. I've seen a couple without degrees. I've seen a couple with associate's degrees, and I've seen a few with certificates come through our ranks. So that is not an obstacle. And once you get the GISP for recertification, you only need 6 points. So the education requirement really focuses on webinars, seminars, and the like. So no, you do not need a degree.
Do we have any more questions?
Well, if there aren't any other questions, I do want to thank you for your time. I've left my email address there. Please don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions. I'd encourage you to visit our website, gisci.org. All of the information is there, and if it's not, let us know, and we'll get it posted there. We are on LinkedIn and Twitter. So if you're on LinkedIn, I'd encourage you to look for our pages. But there's actually two. There's one it's just a GISP page, and that's the better of the two because it's got a heck of a lot more content. And then there's one for the GISCI. But we're here to help move our profession forward, and if there's anything we could do to help you, and please let us know. And I would really encourage you to consider applying for the certification and taking the exam.
I do have a question. Are there any types of GIS field that might benefit one more to focus on in order to prepare for an exam like this? Like you said, there was local government as one of the higher groups, correct?
In terms of membership, yes. But if you mean, in terms of preparing for the exam, is there a better profession to be in? Is that your question?
Yes.
I would say no. The vast majority of folks that are currently certifying are GIS specialists or analysts. and most of the older GISPs that recertify, like myself, are specialist to supervisor level folks that have been in the industry for a while. But unless you're highly specific, like if you're in remote sensing, I would say the ASPRS mapping technologist might be a better certification because we're much broader than just the remote sensing field. But no, the test is designed for the very broad geospatial community itself. We don't really specialize in any. And you will see, like, for instance, some programming questions on the exam, but not enough that if you're not a programmer, that it's going to adversely affect you. Does that answer your question, I hope?
It does, thank you.
Okay, yep. Any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. I appreciate you guys taking the time to join us.
All right. Thank you very much, Tony. Thank you all, everybody, for joining us today. And let's see real quick. Like I said, we're going to have this on our YouTube channel in probably the next day or two, the recording of this. If you need to go back and watch any of it or share with any of your colleagues, and there is a link to that on our website. We have a collection of all the webinars we've done over the last couple of years here on the Magic YouTube channel. All right, so again, thank you so much for all that great info, Tony, and we will be back in 1 month with our next edition of Magic Virtual Presents. Everybody have a great day.
Thanks, Rob.
Take care, everyone.
All right, bye.